Right here is where the great American experiment comes alive. Join us in the fight to restore liberty and American exceptionalism. And together, let's make the case that our charters of freedom are worth defending and honoring. Let's get to work. Hi, I'm Shane Krauser, and I want to welcome you back to Freedom Fires. We're moving the message forward, we're understanding the narrative, and we're engaging the culture. That's how we change America incrementally, one person, one conversation at a time. And last time we met, we went over rights versus privileges. Important to understand the distinction between the two, especially as we go about defending this idea we call freedom. And so let's keep that in mind as we move along. Today we're going to talk about different forms of government. Now you're probably wondering why we haven't got into the history of America and talking about the Constitutional Convention that took place in 1787. We're going to get there, and that's going to happen beginning next time we meet. But I want you to understand why we haven't got there quite yet. We can talk about the Constitutional Convention. We can talk about ultimately the end product of that Constitutional Convention and the battles that they engaged in. But unless we understand the underlying principles, it really doesn't do us a whole lot of good. That's why we've spent time talking about the greatest problem in America today, that being education. The purpose of government, the purpose of a written document that limits individuals within government, rights versus privileges. You understand that framework, then you're going to understand exactly what the founders were ultimately fighting for. And so that's why we're moving along in this fashion. And again, we're going to be talking about different forms of government today. We're going to start out by watching a rather interesting video. This is a video of President Barack Obama's State of the Union address in 2014. What I want you to understand as we watch this is not about the R or the D, Republican or Democrat. This is just one example. We could put Republicans up here. We could put independents up here. That's not the issue. The issue is individuals within government, regardless of party line, typically engage in behavior that violates the rule of law. And we need to call them out if we're going to engage and restore this nation back to the country back to a country that embraced the principles that we cherish here in America today. So we've got to be the watchdogs here. So let's go ahead and take a look at this video of President Barack Obama, about 30-second clip here where he's going to be talking about action that he's going to take. Let's listen in.
But what I offer tonight is a set of concrete, practical proposals to speed up growth, strengthen the middle class, and build new ladders of opportunity into the middle class. Some require congressional action, and I'm eager to work with all of you. But America does not stand still, and neither will I. So wherever and whenever I can take steps without legislation to expand opportunity for more American families, that's what I'm going to do.
Now, I don't know about you folks, but that video is disturbing. It's disturbing because you have a president that has made it very clear that if the legislature will not work with him, he will move unilaterally. That is, if the legislature won't create a law for him to review and ultimately sign off on, he'll make the law himself. Now, that's disturbing. What perhaps is more disturbing is that the legislative branch, members within the legislative branch gave him a standing ovation. In other words, they were applauding the idea that he was telling them, in no uncertain terms, that he would steal their power away from them if it was necessary. So you literally had individuals applauding that and even condoning it. See, these are individuals that haven't read the first paragraph in Article 1, Section 1. What does Article 1, Section 1 say? Well, in my book, Your Nation is Saved, not only do I outline what the Constitution says, I also give you my explanation. Again, I would encourage you to pick this up. It's just a great reference. But Article 1, Section 1 says this: all legislative powers herein granted are vested in Congress. That's important. Not a few legislative powers, not a couple legislative powers, not some legislative powers. All legislative powers are vested in the legislative branch, not in the executive branch, not in the judicial branch. The Constitution means what it says, and it makes it very clear that there's only one branch of government that can make law, and the branch of government that can make law gave the executive branch, which has no power constitutionally to make law, a standing ovation. Problematic. And so this problem is not just the exception to the rule, it's rather systemic. It's playing out all throughout our country at the federal level, the state level, and even the local level, where individuals don't understand the rule of law. So this is important to look at because we've got to ask ourselves, what form of government are we living in? What is that reflective of? Well, that's not even reflective of a democracy. It's certainly not reflective of a constitutional republic. This is likely more in line with what we would call a monarchy or an oligarchy. One individual making decisions without conferring with other branches of government and perhaps not even reflecting on what it is that the people want. That's a problem. So now what we're going to look at is we're going to become those constitutional technicians, those freedom-fighting, those freedom-loving fighter pilots, and understand exactly what these different forms of government will ultimately lead to. Important to understand if we're going to defend the form of government that's guaranteed in our Constitution, which is a constitutional republic that's found in Article 4, Section 4 of our Constitution. Every state is guaranteed a Republican form of government, Republican small r. And we're going to talk about what that means here in just a moment. So let's go ahead and take a look at this video. You can find this on YouTube under Forms of Government, and you can review it not only here, but you can send it out to your friends as well and let them understand, educate them as to what it is that we're dealing with today with respect to understanding what kind of governments exist and what ultimately those different forms of government will lead to. So let's go ahead and watch this together.
When Benjamin Franklin exited the Constitutional Convention, he was asked by a woman, "Sir, what have you given us?" His immediate response was, "A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it." Yet most Americans today have been persuaded that our nation's governmental system is a democracy and not a republic. The difference between these two is essential in understanding Americanism and the American system. Before we discuss political systems, however, it's helpful to address the confusion that has been spread about the political spectrum. Many have been led to believe that the political spectrum places groups such as communists on the far left, fascists or dictators on the far right, and political moderates or centrists in the middle. However, a more accurate political spectrum will show government having zero power on the far right to having 100% power on the far left. At the extreme right, there is no government. The extreme left features total government under such labels as communism, socialism, Nazism, fascism, princes, potentates, dictators, kings, any form of total government. Those who claim that Nazis and fascists are right-wing never define their terms. This amounts to spreading confusion. Toward the middle of the political spectrum can be found the type of government limited to its proper role of protecting the rights of the people. That's where the Constitution of the United States is. Those who advocate such a form of government are really constitutional moderates. So let's analyze the basic forms of government. They are monarchy or dictatorship ruled by one, oligarchy ruled by a few, democracy ruled by a majority, republic ruled by law, and anarchy, which is ruled by no one. In discussing these five, we'll see that they can be narrowed down to even fewer. Looking first at monarchy or dictatorship, this form of government doesn't really exist in the practical sense. It's always a group that puts one of its members up front. A king has his council of nobles or earls, and every dictator has his bureaucrats or commissars, the men behind the scenes. This isn't ruled by one, even though one person may be the visible leader. It's ruled by a group. So let's eliminate monarchy, dictatorship, because it never truly exists. Oligarchy, which is ruled by a group, is the most common form of government in all history. And it is the most common form of government today. Most of the nations of the world are ruled by a powerful few, and therefore oligarchy remains. At the other end, we find anarchy, which means without government. Some people have looked over history and found that many of its worst crimes were committed by governments. So they decided that having no government might be a good idea. But this is a mistake, because as the ancient Greeks stated, without law there can be no freedom. Our founding fathers agreed and held that some amount of government is a necessary force in any civilized, orderly society. In a state of anarchy, however, everyone has to guard life, liberty, and property, and the lives of family members. Everyone must be armed, and movement is severely restricted because one's property has to be protected at all times. Civilized people have always hired someone to do the guarding, a sheriff, a police force, or some branch of government. Once law enforcement was in place, the people were freer. They could leave their property, work in the fields, and so on. In short, the proper amount of government makes everyone freer. There are some who advocate anarchy, however, not because they want no government, but because they don't like what they have. They use anarchy as a tool for revolutionary change. The condition of anarchy is very much like a vacuum where something rushes in to fill it. These calculating anarchists work to break down the existing government with rioting, killing, looting, and terrorism. Tragically, the people living in such chaos often go to those best able to put an end to it and beg them to take over and restore order. And who is best able to put an end to the chaos? The very people who started it. The anarchists who created the problem then create a government run by them, an oligarchy, where they have total power. This is exactly what happened in Russia that led to Lenin taking total power, and in Germany where Hitler's brown shirts created the chaos that brought him to power. But anarchy isn't a stable form of government. It's a quick transition from something that exists to something desired by the power-hungry. It's a temporary condition, and because it isn't permanent, we eliminate it as well. The word democracy comes from two Greek words, demos, meaning people, and kratein, meaning to rule. Democracy, therefore, means the rule of the people, majority rule. This, of course, sounds good, but suppose the majority decides to take away one's home, or business, or children. Obviously, there has to be a limit. The flaw in democracy is that the majority isn't restrained. If more than half the people can be persuaded to want something in a democracy, they rule. What about republic? Well, that comes from the Latin, res meaning thing, and publica meaning public. It means the public thing, the law. A true republic is one where the government is limited by law, leaving the people alone. America's founders had a clean slate to write on. They could have set up an oligarchy. In fact, there were some who wanted George Washington to be their king. But the Founding Fathers knew history, and they chose to give us the rule of law in a republic, not the rule of a majority in a democracy. Why? Let's demonstrate the difference in the setting of the Old West. Consider a lynch mob in a democracy. 35 horseback riders chase one lone gunman. They catch him, and they vote 35-1 to hang him. Democracy has triumphed, and there's one less gunman to contend with. Now consider the same scenario in a republic. The 35 horseback riders catch the gunman and vote 35-1 to hang him. But the sheriff arrives, and he says, "You can't kill him. He's got his right to a fair trial." So they take the gunman back to town. A jury of his peers is selected, and they hear the evidence and the defense, and they decide if he shall hang. Does the jury even decide by majority rule? No, it has to be unanimous, or he goes free. The rights of the government aren't subject to majority rule, but to the law. This is the essence of a republic.
I think this is a great video. And really, I have to say, what I really like about this is Benjamin Franklin. He comes out of the Constitutional Convention in 1787. He's asked the question, what kind of government have you given us? It was Ben Franklin who said, a republic, if you can keep it. A republic. That's what's guaranteed in our Constitution. He didn't say a democracy if you can keep it. He didn't say a monarchy if you can keep it. Anarchy if you wish and if you can keep it. An oligarchy if you can keep it. He said a republic if you can keep it. Not only did he say a republic form of government, he told you whose responsibility it is if you can keep it. It's not a republic if your mayor can keep it, or your congressman can keep it, or if your president can keep it. It's a republic if you can keep it. We, the people, are the ultimate guardians of a republican form of government. So this is important to understand. Nowhere in our Constitution will you find any other form of government guaranteed. Same thing with the Declaration of Independence. And let's talk about that here just as a review, because that clip really does a great job of outlining the different forms of government. Anarchy, no such thing. You have individuals in this country that are talking about anarchy. Those individuals that advocate anarchy quite simply have refused to look at history. They're neglecting what's happened in the past, and anarchy will never work. It will only work if you're the man in power. Once you fall out of power or fall out of good graces with those in power, there is no liberty. Liberty is virtually non-existent unless you are the powerhouse within whatever society it is you're living in. A monarchy. As the video talked about, there's really historically no such thing as a monarchy. Oligarchies are more, really more prevalent throughout history than a monarchy. You typically have one individual who might stand forward, but you know he's got a group of individuals behind him that are orchestrating what it is that needs to be done. You simply have a spokesman for that oligarchy. In addition, you have democracy. And, you know, this is something that we really have to embrace and understand together, because there are some individuals in high places that talk about democracy all the time, whether it's law professors on our campuses throughout the country, whether it's the talking heads or even politicians. Let's spread democracy throughout the world. No, that's not what we want. We don't want to spread democracy. We want to spread freedom throughout the world. And as we've talked about in the past here in class together, we don't want a democracy. Democracy is one of the most vile forms of government known to man. In fact, it was Thomas Jefferson who said, who warned us about the tyranny of the majority. Elbridge Gerry, he was a delegate from Massachusetts, and he warned us of the excesses of democracy. Those are his words. He warned us of the excesses of democracy. And then you had Alexander Hamilton, who told us that people seldom judge or determine right. You don't want the majority coming together and deciding what liberties you and I get to enjoy. We want the rule book in place, a constitution in place, and a recognition of what those liberties are throughout that document known as the Constitution or our Charters of Freedom. Or what about Edmund Randolph? He was the governor of Virginia, and he wanted a form of government that would restrain the fury of democracy. He was concerned about what it is that people do when they come together, and so he says, let's put together a form of government that will restrain the fury of democracy. So how do we get there? The answer is relatively simple, and the founders did the dirty work for us. They said Republican form of government is where it is best found. And I love the example here that they gave in that video of the cowboy and the thief and what that really looks like, because it really does allow us to distinguish between the two, democracy versus a republic. So when you're out there on the streets, talking with your neighbors, talking over the water cooler, talking with friends, involving yourself in grassroots, the grassroots movement and organizations, let's make it clear what we're talking about. We've got to change the way people talk about these ideas. Don't co-opt their language. If they're using democracy, we're going to subtly correct them and make it clear it's a constitutional republic. And now we've got the ammunition to decide and to articulate why those things are worth fighting for and what the consequences are of allowing these ideas to play themselves out within society. We've got history on our side, and that's probably the most important thing. Our founding fathers, as they set up this form of government through our Constitution, they didn't just come up with this idea off the cuff. They were looking at history, they were looking at civilizations, and they recognized that the only way freedom survives is in a Republican form of government. All of these other forms of government that we've talked about simply don't work, and we know that factually because we've seen civilization after civilization fall because they've chosen to do different things. And generally speaking, it has to do with men and women in power attempting to oppress the people by doing just that, abusing their authority. So when we come back, we're going to be talking about the history leading up to the ratification of the Constitution. We're going to talk a little bit about the Revolutionary War. We're going to talk a little bit about the convention and what happened there and some key components. I'm Shane Krauser signing out. We'll see you next time.